Hi, my name is Mark Jones. I'm course leader for psychology, and in today's presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about what psychology is, the types of topic areas that we study on the course. We're also going to look at how the course is assessed. We'll talk a little bit about how psychologists go about explaining and investigating behaviour, and then finally, we're going to look at potential careers in psychology. So, what is psychology? So psychology is the scientific study of the mind and human behaviour. This is basically another way of saying that psychologists are interested in understanding why we do the things that we do. What they do is that they devise theories which are explanations that go and outline the causes of behaviour. So say for example that you think that depression is caused by a lack of serotonin, which is a brain chemical that regulates mood. What you could then do is carry out a study to support this idea. And if that study finds what you're looking for, then that will give you more evidence to make your theory more valid, so more credible to the people that are reading about it. So, for example, in relation to the idea that depression is caused by low levels of the brain chemical serotonin, we can focus on the illness called seasonal affective disorder, which is a type of depression which is caused by a lack of sunlight. What we can do is to carry out a study to illustrate how sunlight and depression are connected together. This was an actual study that was carried out by some psychologists, and what they did was that they compared the rates of depression between a not very sunny part of America, so North America, and a very sunny part of America in Florida. And as you can see from the results, there was a significant difference in the degree to which those in North and Southern America were more likely to get depressed, were likely to get depressed, I should say. Now, what psychologists would then do is draw a conclusion that potentially depression is linked to, in some way, to sunlight, but also they have to be cautious when concluding anything from their results because there could be other factors or extraneous variables that could have impacted the likelihood that people would get depression in these areas. So, for example, one extraneous variable would be that Florida people can be a little bit more affluent, so consequently they would have a better quality of life, which would perhaps impact on the likelihood of them getting depression. So now that we've had a look at an example of what we study in psychology and how we do it, it's time to give you a bit of an overview of the topic areas that we look at on the course. So first off, the course is divided into two halves. There is the first year, which you can, when you finish it, take a qualification, which will give you an AS qualification. So this consists of sitting two exams that will ultimately give you a grade which is worth just 40% of an A level. Now, if you decide to continue on to the second year, then you'll do some additional topics as well, and then you'll take three 2-hour exams that occur at the end of that 2-year period, and they will be on all of the topic areas that you have taken in those 2 years. In terms of some of the topics that we look at in psychology, in the first year we look at social influence, which is the impact of other people on our behaviour. So we'll be looking at some extreme examples of obedience and extreme examples of conformity where people have done things which they wouldn't have thought they would do, but because either they're in a very large group of people or somebody who is a recognized authority figure tells them to do it, they are far more likely to carry out these orders or requests than they thought they would do before they did the study. That's just one area of AS psychology. We also look at things like how your memory works. We look at attachment, which focuses on the influence of your relationship with your primary caregiver in the first 5 years of life and how that can impact on you socially and intellectually later on in your life. In addition to that, we also look at approaches, which are different perspectives we take in terms of explaining and investigating behaviour, as well as psychopathology, which is looking at the signs of different mental illnesses, in this case OCD, phobias and depression, their various causes I should say, and how they can be treated. So for example, we'll look at things like CBT, cognitive behaviour therapy, pharmacology or drugs, and we'll also look at things like systematic desensitization, which is a treatment for phobias. Running through the first and the second year, we'll also look at research methods, which is how psychologists design and carry out the studies that they use to support or challenge the theories in their field. In the second year of psychology, we'll focus on other topics. So we'll look at biopsychology in more detail. We will look at the structure and function of the brain in terms of what areas of the brain govern what behaviors. We'll also look at the psychology of relationships, so why people go into relationships, what causes certain romantic or friendships to succeed or fail. We'll also look at how relationships are different online. So we'll look at social media and the impact that that can have on relationships. In addition, we're also going to look at schizophrenia in more detail. So again, looking at the symptoms, causes and treatments of schizophrenia. And finally, we also look at forensic psychology, which is looking at how psychological research can explain why criminals commit crime. Running through the entire course, we will look at issues and debates, which are just themes that come up again and again in psychology. So I've alluded already to how the course is assessed. What I would say is that in terms of the structure of the exam papers, they consist, like most exam papers, of short answer questions and longer answer questions. Psychology has got slightly shorter sort of longer answer questions than some other subjects. So the longest question that you would get is for 16 marks, which is about 3 pages of your exam book. That's in A level. The longest question you can get at AS in the first year would be a 12-mark question. What I will say though with psychology is it's a highly content heavy subject. There's a lot of information to remember, and so consequently you are assessed on your ability to remember things as well as your ability to understand and apply psychological concepts. So it's basically not a soft option. In terms of the skills that you develop on the course, you will get very good at describing the theories and studies that we look at to show really good knowledge and understanding of them. That's AO1 as we call it. You've also got AO2, which is making links between real world examples of behavior and the research that we look at on the course. And finally, we've got AO3, which is a really important skill because it looks at critically assessing the good and the bad points or strengths and weaknesses of the theories and studies that we look at on the course. Throughout the course, research methods, as I said, will run right throughout the 2 papers because you have to show that you're able to design and carry out psychological research. We'll do a few practical studies to really develop that skill. In addition, there can be up to 10% math skills. What I would say there is it's basic computation. So we're looking at things, can you calculate a percentage, ratios, convert things to decimal places, fractions, read tables, and draw basic graphs. So I'd say that the maths isn't particularly challenging. Certainly if you were to do A-level maths, you'd see a significant difference there. So just a little bit more about how psychologists explain behavior. There are 4 main perspectives that we look at. These are the biological, the behavioral, the psychodynamic, and finally the cognitive. The biological approach is the first approach that we are going to look at in psychology. So this says that basically all of our behavior or anything psychological has a physiological or physical basis. So for example, if we look at the study at the sort of bottom right hand corner of the screen, this says that behavior, this suggests that people who have schizophrenia, a mental illness characterized by hallucinations and delusions, tend to be related to somebody that also has schizophrenia. So what the graph suggests is that the more genetic relatedness you have to somebody who has schizophrenia, the greater the likelihood that you will also get schizophrenia yourself. So the final bar right at the bottom suggests that if you have an identical twin that has schizophrenia, then you are, because you share 100% shared genes, you've almost got a 50% chance of getting it yourself. Biopsychology also looks at the structure and function of the brain. Okay, so we've noticed, for example, that certain brain areas govern certain behaviors. E.g., there is an area in your left frontal lobe called Broca's area, which relates to speech production. So if you have that area damaged, then you are unable to articulate certain words, even though you can think them. In addition to that, we also look at the role of biochemicals in biopsychology. These are chemicals in your brain that regulate your behavior. So we've mentioned serotonin already. We could also mention dopamine as well, the reward chemical that tends to be found in larger amounts in people that have schizophrenia. There are also other biochemicals as well, such as testosterone that makes you aggressive, and cortisol, which tends to make you stressed. All of these things can influence your behavior. In relation to the behavioural approach, um, the behavioural approach emphasises the role of learning in behaviour and the idea that we are born as blank slates. What that means is that we learn all of our behaviour. So, for example, we can learn by classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is learning through association. So, for example, this is good at explaining phobias. For example, if the case study of little Albert, he was made to be afraid of a rat, which he wasn't afraid with before, because they paired the rat with something that caused him fear. In this case, a loud noise. They banged a bar next to him. It made a loud noise whenever there was a rat, and so he associated the rat with the fear that he got from the loud noise. So again, we make these associative links, which can cause us to behave maladaptively, e.g. get phobias, extreme fears, but also we can unlearn those phobias as well by pairing the stimulus, in this case a rat, with something that causes you relaxation. So you unlearn that negative association. The third way of explaining human behavior is the psychodynamic approach. This is synonymous with the idea of the unconscious mind. There is a part of our mind that we are not aware of, which can affect our behavior in some way. So the classic way that this is depicted in the movies is usually you get the therapy, psychoanalysis, given to somebody who lies on the couch and they talk to a therapist who tells them about their childhood. Because the psychodynamic approach, again, emphasizes the idea it's that those formative years of the first 5 years of your life, which can really impact how you develop later on in your life. The cognitive approach is the final approach that we'll look at. This, unlike the psychodynamic approach, emphasizes the role of thinking and the idea that our thoughts influence our behavior and emotion. So, for example, it's very good at explaining why we get depressed, because people that have depression tend to get negative thoughts about themselves, their life, and their future. And because they're thinking about these things all the time, they can consequently become more vulnerable to depression because it'll affect their concentration, their memory, and contribute to their low mood and inability to basically be happier in their life. Luckily, on the course, we look at cognitive behavior therapy, which is a way of improving people's mood by challenging their maladaptive thoughts by presenting them with evidence against them. So finally, what careers are there in relation to psychology? Well, there are a number of careers that you can do. A lot of them you need a psychology degree as well. So you could, for example, first get a psychology degree, and then you'd need to get a master's and potentially a PhD as well if you, for example, wanted to go particularly into as a research psychologist, so carrying out research at a university, which we could then see when we read about it in textbooks. There are other areas of psychology you can go into. So educational psychologist, you do a psychology degree, a master's in education, and then you'd train as a teacher as well. And then that would enable you to be able to support children with behavioural or academic difficulties so that they are able to keep on track with their learning. Forensic psychologists work with the police in order to help them catch criminals, and they also work with offenders to help them rehabilitate their behaviour. Sports psychologists, on the other hand, work with sporting teams to improve performance. Performance has a key mental aspect to it, so they play an increasingly important role in today's society. Psychiatrists are medical doctors that specialise in mental health. Occupational psychologists will work with businesses to improve productivity. And also there are other kind of related careers that you can go into with psychology. So for example, teaching, you do a psychology degree and then you could do a teaching qualification, or sort of general careers like marketing or advertising or human resources, anything that basically involves understanding human behavior. So I hope you found my presentation useful. If you have any more queries that you'd like to ask me, then feel free to email me. My email address, mark.jones@sgscol.ac.uk, is on the slide, as well as my colleague Nadine Tellis's as well. One final thing to add is that the picture to the right is the course textbook. This is our students also get free access to this book because myself and my wife do work for the publishers, so they get free digital access, which is just another way that students can be supported, so it helps us maintain the excellent results that we have achieved over the years in the psychology department. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye, and I hope you're enjoying Open Day. All right.